Hey there, everyone, and welcome to Make Business Better from Quartz. Every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm joined by business executives who are working to make their small slice of the business world better in some way and are willing to come on and share their tips and tricks for all of us to hopefully learn from. I'm Zach Seward, the CEO of Quartz, and today we're talking to our guest, Dennis Woodside, who's president of the high-flying plant-based meats company Impossible Foods, which has grown in just a decade from a kitchen laboratory experiment to a mainstay in supermarkets, Burger Kings, Starbucks, and more. I want to talk to Dennis about the challenges of running a business in that specific high-growth period that Impossible seems to be in right now, how he thinks about taking the right kinds of risks and what challenges there have been since he joined the company, and trying to making a shift from really an R&D lab into a much more mature and high-growing company. All the while, Impossible is trying to do that kind of growth with a pretty lofty, purposeful mission, which is to drastically reduce humanity's destructive impact, I'm quoting here, on the global environment by completely replacing the use of animals as a food production technology. And I believe the goal is to do that in the next 20 years. So we should start, as always, with the Quartz essentials on this topic. And the first slide I wanted to show is from a recent study by the consulting firm Kearney, which is positing that Impossible, along with all of its competitors, will, if not entirely replace animal meat, become the majority of consumption of meat or meat-like product consumption over those next 20 years, which, if you stop to think about it and consider what kind of dramatic change that is going to augur in society and how people obviously consume food over the next 20 years, if this projection comes to pass, let alone the mission to completely replace animal based food technology over the next 20 years. And so, of course, there's a bit of an arms race on to seize the majority of market share there. Impossible is up against a lot of competitors. We had a great article in Quartz about how that arms race has played out in American supermarkets as well as restaurants. This was a chart showing a rollout into retail establishments by both Impossible and one of its competitors, Beyond Meat. As of the end of 2020, Impossible was out ahead, at least by this metric. I'll ask our guest in a second where things stand today. But just two ways of showing what an incredibly high growth area meat is, and you can see sort of between all those charts and graphs what kinds of challenges the companies must be going through. And we've got exactly the right person to talk about all of those challenges today. As I said, our guest is Dennis Woodside, Impossible Foods. Dennis joined Impossible in March 2019 as president, which was then a newly created position, which I would summarize as helping the company mature and grow into this next era, which is something he's done in other companies before that, as chief operating officer of Dropbox and running Motorola when I was part of Google. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me.
So I understand you're splitting time between the home office and the office. So maybe one of the last of these shows I get to do where I ask this question, but you are working from your home office today, I know. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience, just before we get into our main programming, something in your office behind you and the story behind it.
Sure. So a lot of books. I'd say I've half read many of them, but this is something that is kind of cool. This is you can see that. This is from the master of the household has received Her Majesty's command to invite Dennis Woodside to a reception at Buckingham Palace given by the Queen of England. So when I was living in London and working at Google, the Queen was actually very technology forward and worked with Google to broadcast her Christmas address on YouTube. And that was a little memento of recognition for the help that we gave Buckingham Palace. and I got to meet the queen.
Excellent. So I assume you RSVP'd, yes?
I am a what?
You RSVP'd, yes, I gather, when the invitation came in.
Oh, yes, of course I would. Yes.
There's no option when.
No, you learn all these
Queen
little
is
formalities about visiting the queen, which was pretty cool.
So, well, thanks for sharing that. Getting into today's topic, one of the things I find most fascinating about Impossible Foods is that the company spent its first 8 years, 2011 to 2019, really is as an R&D lab. For the bulk of that time, almost all of the employees were scientists. And it went from that kind of a company to contract with Burger King and then a bunch of other big name establishments and into high growth mode, I think you tell me the history, around 2019, right when you joined. Can you give us a little more color on what that was like, what kind of company you were walking into, and some of the challenges that were in front of you?
Yeah. So when the company, as you said, was founded by Pat Brown. Pat is a scientist, biologist, biochemist, and a physician who was on the faculty at Stanford. And in 2011, stepped down or took a sabbatical to think about, well, what is the biggest impact he could have with his life on climate change. And he decided that the biggest impact he could have is to figure out what gives meat its taste, so that he could build products that replace animal-based food, animal-based proteins. And so we set about doing that by hiring a number of scientists and really researching what gives meat its flavor at a molecular level. And the molecule that that had been known to contribute to flavor is leg hemoglobin. But Pat figured out a way to ferment leg hemoglobin at scale and at very low cost. And that is the ingredient that we produce ourselves that gives our product some of its flavor, its transition from a raw pink state to a cooked brown state that is aided by leg hemoglobin. And it's some of its sensory aspects, the sizzle and smell, that's also aided by leg hemoglobin. If you put our product next to another plant-based protein, you'll see it acts completely differently. It does really act much more like meat, and that's what got all the interest around the product.
I've heard it. Sorry to interrupt. Essentially, like the uncanny aspect, like this really is kind of like a burger.
Exactly, just that surprise
comes from that ingredient.
Total surprise and delight. And now early in the company's history, they couldn't produce a lot. They had a small pilot plant. So they would go to high-end chefs, very influential chefs like David Chang, who traditionally were not supporting any kind of vegan menu item, and they took the meat and shared it with the chefs, and all the chefs had the same reaction. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is not from an animal. And they got the support of a small number of very influential chefs. That's what they did with the little product that they could produce at the time, and that created this buzz. And then all of a sudden it was kind of off to the races. And when I got there, the company already had White Castle as a customer. It had Umami Burger, a number of better burger companies or restaurant chains, but the scale up had not quite happened. And in fact, when I was talking to Pat about joining the company, he was very focused on sales and how to drive sales. And then when I got to the company in my first week, he said, "Don't worry about sales. You have to go to the factory and figure out how to scale, because we're about to land this huge customer, and we haven't really planned out how we're going to actually do it." So that was kind of my first month, and that famously led eventually to Pat sending a memo out to the company on a Friday evening saying, "We need everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a scientist or in the finance department. We need everybody to go to the factory on Monday, and we're going to train you how to run the line." And that's what we did.
There's sort of a theme in that phase of Impossible's history. I think about, I think you've described it as agility. The skill sets that you needed in the early years were clearly great scientists in a lab fooling around till they came up with the right formula, and then all of a sudden what you needed were just people lifting boxes and getting
Yeah.
getting materials out the door. Has that how you think about hiring for the company now in its growth period? Like, how do you know? I mean, obviously, to a certain extent, you know the functions you need, but I imagine it's hard to predict where that's going to go and what the balance of skill sets the company will need over time will be.
Yeah, it actually is really hard because on the one hand, especially as we get bigger, we do need people who have very specialized skills. So an example, we are building out a network of fermentation plants, and these plants are they take 2 to 3 years to build. They can cost $100 million to build one, and so it helps to have people who've actually built fermentation plants. At the same time, that industry, fermentation, the products that are typically being fermented are very stable. They've been around a long time. There's not a lot of growth. So speed doesn't matter as much. And the entire way you build a plant is not optimized for speed. It's more optimized for cost and predictability. Well, we need to optimize for speed. So while we want to have people in the company who know how to build a plant, we kind of want to challenge their thinking and also put people in the team who haven't built a plant, who can ask the questions about, well, why do you need to do it this way? Why does it take so long? Why can't you parallel path these 3 work streams so we can get to the answer sooner? And the reason that's important for us is the business is growing so fast. We need that capacity to come online as quickly as we can. So from an organizational standpoint, you struggle. There's this tension between, do we find people who really understand what the industry that we're trying to disrupt, or are those same people going to hold us back because they're going to think the same way that the incumbent industry thinks? And we had the same challenge at Google when we were scaling quickly. We early in the company's history, we didn't really hire a lot of people from the advertising industry or the media industry because we felt that we had a product that was very different than what they were used to selling. The way we wanted to communicate with our customers was very different than the way that industry had treated its customers. And we kind of feel the same way about food. We have, if you look at our employees, about 1/3 of the company is from the food industry, but 1/3 is from biotech and 1/3 is from tech. So it's not really built like a traditional food company. And we think that's healthy to have that tension between people who know the industry and how things work and people who don't and can challenge it.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with me in some hiring decisions that we made early on at Quartz when you're just 50 people. But I imagine, as and I know certainly the experience at Google, as the company grew and matured, that's when you do bring in the specialists and the people who have spent 20 years in advertising, et cetera. And how do you do that without losing the culture of the company? Or I'm speaking now about Impossible. How do you think about maintaining what drove the company in its first 8 years, where it was much more experimental, as the day-to-day operations of the company really shift dramatically? And I assume the people who are doing it are quite different as well.
Well, I think there are a couple things. First, Pat is deeply involved in every aspect of the business, and he is the mission, and he really embodies the culture in many ways. And here is a person who started something completely from an idea and scratch, and had he not taken those risks, and he'll talk about all the dead ends that they went down and the experiments that they made that didn't pay off, but they learned something that they applied later that actually wound up working. So that makes a huge difference. Another big difference is we have a big R&D team. We have over 200 people in R&D, and that is inherently an experimenting culture where they're always trying new things and experimenting and learning and learning from one another. And that actually does influence the rest of the company. One of our values is think like a scientist, meaning bring data, but experiment. And experiment fast and fail fast. And I think that kind of culture, you see that in our manufacturing, our approach to manufacturing and scale up of new lines, our product development approach and launching new products. All of those things definitely have an influence on the company and on the culture. But you do have to be mindful of who you're hiring. That's probably the number one criteria. Can people flex from the background that they came and that we want, but also understand what we're trying to do and how we want to do it?
I want to talk about the company's mission in a second. But the last question on how you've operationalized this. Your role was a new one for Impossible when it was created as president, but it's a common role around a Valley at a certain stage of maturity. Companies, tend to add an operational role, whether it's COO or president, and bring in someone with experience like yourself. How do you choose the division of responsibilities between you and the CEO? Which is another way of asking, what does the org chart look like at Impossible?
Yeah, so it changes. It's changed already over time, but broadly speaking, my teams are the teams that define what we're going to build. So define what is the product that we're going to create next. And then bring those products into production, and then take those products into the market. That's broadly what my teams do. I also have the people team, because recruiting is kind of integral, and the people operations integral to scale up. At some point that that might wind up with Pat, but that's how we divide things up. And then there's an R&D team who's led by a former member of the Vanderbilt faculty. We have a newly formed marketing is now with a CMO who came from Apple, and then we have the more typical legal and finance functions. So that's how we've split the responsibilities up. I'm kind of responsible for what we're doing this year. That's a little bit how I think of it. I certainly am involved in kind of things further out, but our R&D team is really thinking about what's the next formulation. What are we going to launch in 2 years and in 5 years?
That makes a lot of sense, and I've come to learn there's no such thing as a perfect org chart.
No, there's not.
Perfect ones. So you touched on a few times now the company's mission, and I was quoting from it at the beginning of the episode. You're of course trying to replace animals as food technology, but the mission is, the reason for doing that is driven by climate change, and reverse what looks like at this moment to be inexorable march to really destructive and catastrophic climate change across the planet. That's a big and certainly admirable goal. And I want to talk about how you sort of imbue that into the day-to-day operations of the company. Before we get there, we should establish, it's just some basic facts that have come in from the audience as we've been talking about it. So just lay out for me real quick, what is it about plant-based meat that has less of an impact on the environment than sort of traditional meat production? How does the carbon footprint compare? That was a question that we got from CC.
Yeah, so the animal-based industry contributes about 70% of global greenhouse gases, which is a staggeringly high amount. It's comparable to the transportation industry. It's actually slightly more than the entire transportation industry. And most people don't. People are becoming more aware of that, but most people don't understand that. And the reason is that the animal industry effectively is incredibly inefficient at converting proteins that come from plants into proteins that go into humans. You have this intermediary, which is called typically the cow, which is only 10% efficient. So 10% of the calories and the protein that the cow consumes actually make it to your plate. Whereas our product, 100% of the proteins that are in the plants and all the nutrients that are coming from the plants are getting to your stomach. So you have an industry that's consuming a huge amount of land, a huge amount of water, and that has a very negative impact on the environment. All of that land that otherwise could be sequestering carbon is not. Furthermore, the cows themselves emit gas, and that contributes to global warming as well. And then you have all the transportation involved and logistics in transporting that food. So when you add all of that up, it's a pretty catastrophic impact on the planet, and it's quite unnecessary. We've kind of grown to be dependent on a singular animal, a cow, just because it was industrialized in a way that made it available globally. but it doesn't have to be that way. And the plant-based industry really is showing that you can provide food that is delicious and nutritious and people love, that tastes just like meat. And so our goal isn't to convert people who are already vegan or vegetarian. In fact, a lot of vegans, will think it tastes too much like meat for their liking. But our goal is to attract the 95% of people who are eating meat and show them that they can have an experience that is as fun, engaging, healthy, or more healthy and nutritious as what they're used to. So that's a little bit about how we think of it, and the consumption or the actual impact of our product. We use 1/10 the water, less than 1/10 the overall land. So it's far lower on the environment as well.
I'm in that 95% that still eats meat, but feel like I'm in for the target demographic to be convinced in the next 5 years to go vegetarian because of the climate change argument, and that's been such a I think a dramatic shift in how people think about food consumption. Vegetarianism was the animal rights issue. I feel like in prior decades, and now cast as an environmental issue. I mean, what's your prediction? When am I going to be entirely or predominantly vegetarian? Would you think in the next 5 years?
Well, so it's super early. So our household penetration at retail is about 3%. That means 3% of American households in the last 60 days have purchased an Impossible product. Now that's up from 0 a year ago. So it's you put a stat out about the overall protein industry being like around $1 trillion. We think it's actually closer to 3 trillion. So it's a huge market. But there are some things that we need to do to earn the right to kind of make it to your plate. We have to get the product right, and we think we have a great tasting product. It is more nutritious. There's no cholesterol. It's lower saturated fat. But we can improve on that product every year, and that's the intention. Is just like your iPhone gets better every year or every other year, we're iterating. That's what those R&D people are doing. We're iterating on the current product, and the next version will be better. The other thing we need to do is we have to have more products in the store. If you walk around your typical supermarket, there are probably 20 or 30 selling points in the store where you could purchase a ground beef product or more. And then there are other products like pastas and sauces that have ground beef in them. All of those are opportunities for Impossible. And right now we're in basically 2 spots in the store. We have a patty and we have a 12-ounce brick. So getting more and more slots in the store is important, because when you walk around, you have different needs. Sometimes you might be looking for a sauce. Sometimes you might be wanting a ready-to-eat meal. Other times you want a burger. So getting more points in the store is important. And then third is price. Our products and the plant-based industry in general is priced considerably higher than animal-based beef. And that's because the animal industry has had 100 years to optimize its supply chain. We're rapidly reducing our costs and rapidly reducing prices. We fill up our factories, we get more scale out of our supply chain, and we can pass those cost reductions on to consumers. So we've lowered prices twice in the last year, and we think we're going to need to continue to lower price to really earn the right to your plate. So it's not a question of, well, this is slightly more expensive, so I'm not going to make the trade. So those are some of the things that we're working on to earn more of the share of stomach, so to speak. So we're not just an occasional product that you buy, but we're a staple.
Got it. Well, that makes sense, and no doubt that's going to be require quite a lot of growth. So we got a really great audience question about how you weigh the challenges of growth with the company's commitment to sustainability. So I get on a fundamental level, you want more people eating plant-based meat than animal meat, and as much of it, the more you're achieving that mission. But no doubt, in the actual manufacturing process and other particulars of scaling up as a company, you must be facing a ton of questions that impact the sustainability of the process. How are you weighing that? How are you making sure you're not in fact inflicting more harm on the planet in the process of getting Impossible into more stomachs, as you said?
Yeah, so we have a sustainability officer who who looks at our entire supply chain, works with, first of all, to be a supplier to Impossible, we need to understand your sustainability practices. We need to know that you have a set of goals around sustainability. And then once we're in the manufacturing process, we're constantly looking to re-engineer that process to reduce waste. So an example might be a supplier that supplies us in 20-pound bags of a given supply. That's wasteful because those bags wind up in the trash. And so how do we work with that supplier to create larger packages that are reusable? And so those are the kinds of things that we're doing. But you're right. In the short term, there's a trade-off because you can go fast and take what the supplier has, or you can work with that supplier to redesign what they're doing to better suit the sustainability mission. And we kind of have to do both. Sometimes we have to optimize for speed, but once we get going, we can go back and make sure that the way the supplier is working is sustainable in and of itself. And those are the kinds of things that are super important for us. We also like partnering with companies that have strong sustainability missions or are starting to lean into sustainability. And I would say Burger King and Starbucks are two good examples where Starbucks has been on this journey for a while. Their CEO published a pretty lengthy commitment to sustainability in their packaging, in their food supply. They are actively introducing more alternatives to animal-based products onto their menu. You may have seen that they introduced Oatly milk recently. And so we love being a part of that mission and helping them achieve their mission. Burger King is another one which has recently upped its level of commitment to sustainability, and we're part of that. And we can, when we meet with them and we talk to them about our partnership, we always lead with, hey, did you know that by putting our product on the menu, you've saved over 1 million miles of driving in terms of greenhouse gases avoided. Those sorts of things really matter to them and to what they're trying to achieve as well.
Got it. Well, last question for you. I showed that chart at the beginning, and it went all the way up until 2020. And then we'd all know what fired last. It seems like there's been a bit of an arms race between you and rivals in getting into restaurants, getting into supermarkets. And no doubt that continued over the course of the pandemic. But I'm curious, where does the dramatic shift in consumer habits that we saw over the last 14 months leave the company? Where's your focus in getting in front of more people and into more stomachs, as you said? For the
we've seen quite a bit of growth on. There's two sides of the business. There's food service, which are restaurants, and then there's retail, which are our grocery stores. And until a year ago, we really had very little grocery store presence or retail presence. We went from 200 doors, which is the way you measure availability, to 20,000 doors in a year, which is kind of unheard of in food. But we only have 2 SKUs. So that side, we have to keep, as I was saying earlier, get more SKUs, be available more product types. And then you have the restaurant business, which of course was dramatically impacted by COVID. But that business breaks down into sort of the large QSRs and then the smaller chains, the local restaurants. The local restaurants were really impacted by COVID, but are coming back. The larger operations like a Starbucks or a White Castle or Qdoba or Burger King, all of which are customers, they have strong drive-through operations and digital platforms, and they've done okay. So even though I think we have 40,000 food service doors, and that sounds like a lot, but there's like 800,000 restaurants in the US, and I don't even know how many there are in the world. So we're still very early in getting on the menu of many restaurants. I still go to restaurants where they have a veggie burger, and that that no one's buying that, and it's just wasting menu space, and they have to manage the inventory. It's not effective. So we think that's gonna flip over into one of either us or beyond. It seems like it's us and them. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of other players that are getting much traction. And so there's still a huge opportunity in the restaurant segment to get on more menus. And then within a menu, often a restaurant will start with one item. So we have one menu item at Starbucks. So we have one menu item at Burger King. And so then it's how do we get on 3 or 4 menu items within the restaurant? So lots of different growth avenues. And a lot of the challenge that we have is how do you prioritize all that? Especially COVID hits and you just kind of throw the playbook out and shoot and body left and let's get into 20,000 retail doors. That's exactly what we did. So that's sort of how we're thinking about growth. But there's years of growth ahead in this industry, and for us for sure.
Well, it sounds like the war against the veggie burger. I will we'll leave it there, and appreciate Dennis all your thoughts and insights, and for coming on to talk today. Good luck with all of that, and hope we'll have you on another time.
Thank you. Thanks, Zach.
Thanks for joining us. That's it for today's episode of Make Business Better, but we'll be back here next Tuesday, as always, at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'll be talking with Shannon Schuyler, the Chief Purpose and Inclusion Officer at PwC. In between, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, or otherwise to get notified whenever we go live, and I'll see you here next week. Thanks a lot.